Hello there, welcome back to another episode of the True Gamer Top 10, and today we're going to take a look at the top 10 worst PSP games. That's right, the original Sony PSP handheld system, the top 10 worst, most terrible PSP games. Number 1. The Golden Compass came out in 2007. This action fantasy cash-in is even worse than the critically panned film it was based on. Unforgivable bugs and constant glitches, such as spontaneous loading screens during action sequences, and broken gameplay plagued this pathetic PSP port. With its lackluster presentation, slippery controls, and horrendous camera angles, the Golden Compass on the PSP is one of the worst movie-based games in handheld history. Number 2. Gran Turismo came out in 2009. The GT series has always been an overblown Sony exclusive franchise, but this one takes the cake for being a pile of racing rectal redundancy. The PSP version is even worse than the usual console mediocrity, since you can't even upgrade cars and it doesn't feature an actual career mode. Add that to the predictable, slow, and very boring simulated gameplay that has less vehicular excitement than driving Miss Daisy, and you have one of the crappiest racing games in the PSP's library. Number 3. Monster Hunter Freedom Unite came out in 2008. The Monster Hunter series was traditionally less popular in the Western United States market than in Japan, and it definitely reached a very low point with Freedom Unite. The tedious loading times, horrible camera angles, and flawed combat engine fails to deliver on the PSP. Without online multiplayer or exciting fast-paced gameplay, Freedom Unite is more like prison for life. Terrible. Number 4. God of War Chains of Olympus came out in 2008. One of the cheapest excuses for an action-adventure game, Chains of Olympus is just lazy and underdeveloped. Its extremely short campaign and story mode, the weak-looking powers, and dated graphics makes this handheld God of War game very forgettable. We really didn't need this game either, because it feels like a step back in the legacy of Kratos, and way better God of War games on the consoles were already available. Number 5. GTA Liberty City Stories came out in 2005. With the PSP's broken left analog controls, Liberty City Stories is like the poor man's version of the console games that we've seen on the PS2. You got a very small choice of radio songs, the soundtrack is very limited, you got the tedious and generic missions that don't feel fun or exciting, you got the severely low-quality environments and the PS1 looking graphics. This was like getting served a pile of puke in a trash bag after years of having delicious, high-quality food, such as pork chops and cotton candy on the menu of your favorite restaurant. What a freaking disappointing mess. Number 6. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII came out in 2007. In order to cash in on the waning popularity of Final Fantasy, Crisis Core is your typical hack sequel to a much more relevant game that came out 10 years before it. This action RPG tells the story about Zack Fair, who's basically just a cheap character design ripoff of Cloud Strife from FF7. They also ripped off a real Japanese celebrity named Gact with the character Genesis, meaning that Square Enix themselves are just a bunch of unoriginal thieves. Number 7. Daxter came out in 2006. This is basically the token Jak and Daxter spin-off related game on the handheld, and it's really nothing special on any level. Daxter, the video game, focuses on the sidekick himself, Daxter, and his adventures, but the platforming is very weak and very repetitive. The enemies are overplayed, the environments look way too cartoonish, and the audio doesn't really stand out. Even the minigames are boring, and after about maybe an hour with this game, an hour, 2 hours, you'll find yourself wondering why you wasted time and money on this generic action platformer. Number 8. Dissidia, Final Fantasy, came out in 2008. Dissidia is nothing special for the PSP because it doesn't offer much variety or gameplay innovation for fighting games. Generic characters that you levitate around and fly around these bland and empty stages, it really makes it feel like a cheap Dragon Ball Z wannabe ripoff, except this time with Final Fantasy mascots instead of Toriyama's creations. The gameplay is identical for pretty much the entire roster. The battle menu is slow and boring, and the game modes, they're not arcadey enough for fighting game fans, and they're not grinding enough for RPG fans. Number 9. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker came out in 2010. One of the weakest titles on the PSP, the Metal Gear series just do not work for the handheld systems. The stages are way too small and repetitive, the story doesn't feel important, and the co-op is a complete waste of time. The boss fights are very boring and feels tedious, and its simplistic stealth engine truly exposes the PSP as a very limited system by 2010. Number 10. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition came out in 2005. While Rockstar is known for solid console games, their PSP handheld titles are quite disposable. Dub Edition is all about fast-paced street racing with hot soundtracks at nighttime stages on the main systems like the PS2, but on the PSP it's like a stunted monkey with half a brain missing. The frame rates are way too choppy and inconsistent, the load times are way too long, and the soundtrack is hampered down by stuttering issues. If you want to play a broken racing game, then please go ahead and try Dub Edition PSP for a subpar experience. Alright, so that's it for this episode of the True Gamer Top 10, and that's the top 10 worst PSP games of all time. The PSP definitely lost to the much superior DS system, and as you can see by this top 10 worst games, the PSP never stood a freaking chance because all its games pretty much freaking stunk. The PSP stands for Poopy Sucky Plaything. Ugh. The True Gamer Top 10 is created, performed, and produced by the Review Space channel. Please check him out on youtube.com/thereviewspace. Thank you. Until next time.